My Lords, we now come to a first reading. Lord Harlech on behalf of Lord Bellamy.
My Lords, on behalf of my noble friend Lord Bellamy, I beg to introduce a bill to amend the Arbitration Act 1996. I beg to move that this bill be now read a first time.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as of that opinion will say content, contrary not content, the contents have it. First reading of a private member's bill, Lord Woodley.
I beg to introduce a bill to amend the law relating to workplace information and consultation, employment protection and trade union rights to provide safeguards for workers against dismissal and re-engagement on inferior terms and conditions and for connected purposes. I beg to move this bill be now read for the first time.
Good. The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as of that opinion will say content. Content. Contrary not content, the contents have it. First reading of a private member's bill, Baroness Twycross.
My Lords, I beg to introduce a bill to amend the Housing Act 1988 so that long leases of residential dwellings are not deemed to be assured tenancies for the purposes of that Act and for connected purposes. I beg to move that this bill be now read a first time.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as of that opinion will say content. Content. Contrary not content, the contents have it. Second reading of the Trade, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership Bill, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton on behalf of Lord Johnson of Lainston.
My Lords, on behalf of my noble friend Lord Johnson of Lainston, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. It is truly an honour to stand here at this dispatch box and make my maiden speech in this House. I have always respected the work that is done here, so often a patient, diligent and considered compliment to the other place, and I hope to play a full part in your Lordship's House. Indeed, I was only in the other place for 15 years, and 11 of those were as Leader of the Opposition or Prime Minister. So I hope I can look forward to many more years in this House. And when I look at the ornate carved wooden panels that surround us and compare them to my now infamous shepherd's hut, I can tell you this is already a significant upgrade. I would like to thank my introducers, my noble friends, the Lord Privy Seal, Lord True, and the Government Chief Whip, Lady Williams of Trafford. I have to admit that I recommended both of them for the peerage. Indeed, I am in what Margaret Thatcher described in her maiden speech here as in a delicate position, responsible for proposing to elevation to this House quite so many of its current members. So I hope you'll forgive me for my part in putting, how can I put it, space here at a premium. I note that the Liberal Democrat benches are particularly full. I always said to my Deputy Prime Minister and partner and friend, Nick Clegg, that his party would feel the benefit of participating in the coalition for many, many years to come. I just didn't predict exactly how that would manifest itself. I'd also like to thank Black Rod, the doorkeepers, the police and other staff for facilitating my introduction yesterday and for warmly welcoming me back to Parliament. I first set foot in this place as a teenager in the 1980s, when I worked briefly as a parliamentary researcher. I watched from, I think, just up there, as the late Lord Macmillan, aged 90, leaning elegantly on a stick, delivered his maiden speech. It was a thoughtful, measured evisceration of the late Lady Thatcher's government and its handling of the miners' strike. I intend no such censure for my successor in 10 Downing Street. Indeed, wanting to serve under Rishi Sunak, who I believe is a strong and capable Prime Minister, was one of the reasons why I accepted his offer of this role. I had 2 former party leaders in my cabinet, alongside many veterans of Tory leadership campaigns, one of which, of course, was the noble Lord Clark, and I valued all their advice. And I hope that some of my experience will help the Prime Minister in meeting the vital challenges that we face as a country. That said, it was a surprise to be asked. I have not been sitting like some latter-day de Gaulle at Colomblé-les-Deux Églises, waiting to be asked, how shall I put it, to take back control. Nor am I Cincinnatus hovering over my plough. I leave all classical allusions, and indeed illusions for that matter, to another former Prime Minister with whom I shared a number of educational experiences. There is a strong precedent for members of this House from all parties serving in the Cabinet. Peter Carrington and Alec Douglas-Hume, and more recently the noble Lords, Lord Mandelson, Lord Adonis, Lord Frost, the noble Baroness Lady Morgan of Coates. Like all of them, I respect the primacy of the other place. As tradition dictates, a Secretary of State who sits in the Lords is mirrored by the most senior minister in their department. That minister is the Right Honourable Andrew Mitchell MP, who will deputise for me in the other place, and I believe he'll do an excellent job. I will look forward to answering noble Lords' questions monthly and appear before all the relevant committees. I recognise my responsibilities to this House, and I'm happy to consider other appropriate mechanisms so that Parliament is able to scrutinise all the work of my department. The noble Lord Mandelson sent me a particularly charming welcome, but he pointed out that I am a comeback novice, and this is only my first one compared with his 3. I suppose my response should be to point out that to make 3 comebacks, you need both his prodigious talent and you need to be sacked twice by the Prime Minister, which is a fate I'm hoping to avoid. I take my seat bearing the title of Chipping Norton. In fact, the first message I received after my appointment was from the vicar's wife, making sure that I would take the town's name. But I'm not claiming divine intervention. It was an easy choice. This beautiful place is one of the West Oxfordshire towns which I represented in Parliament. It's the place where I brought up my children and the place our family still considers home. The Chippy Larder Food Project, where I volunteered for over 2 years after the start of the pandemic, will have to manage without me for a while. Last year, 3 of us loaded up a lorry full of food, clothes and supplies and drove it to the Red Cross Centre on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Our leader was Rizvana Pool, who, and members will be pleased to hear, in a House that values cross-party collaboration, is one of the town's Labour councillors. It was a privilege to make my first visit as Foreign Secretary to Ukraine last week. I told the President how much we all admire the bravery and fortitude of the Ukrainian people. We will stand with them for as long as it takes. And I was proud to hear him describe Britain as their best partner in their struggle. My Lords, his country's plight is a reminder of the great challenges we face. The things we take for granted, freedom, the rule of law, democracy, they are under threat across the world. These are daunting times. Invasion in Europe, war in the Middle East, climate change, growing world poverty, illegal migration, threats of terrorism and new pandemics. It has never been more clear that our domestic security depends upon global security. And we must approach these challenges from a position of strength. Our Foreign Office, diplomatic service, intelligence services, our aid and development capabilities, these are some of the finest assets of their kind anywhere in the world. And I've seen at first hand the professionalism, the passion, the patriotism of the people who staff them. And I know that they have been expertly and diligently represented in this House for many years now by my noble friend Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, with whom I'm proud to work. As Prime Minister, I learned that the respect we command overseas also depends on success at home. We certainly didn't get everything right, but over 6 years we did smash some of the big political orthodoxies, showing that you can grow the economy and cut carbon emissions. You can cut the deficit and create jobs. You can achieve the best school results in the poorest areas. And you can start to build a society that is multi-ethnic, multiracial, and proud and patriotic. And today, with the British Indian Prime Minister at our helm, we have a good opportunity to do all of those things and ensure we stand taller in the world and stronger too. My Lords, let me turn to the subject of today's debate. The UK will join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, otherwise known as CPTPP. And this bill helps to make that happen. This is an age of rapid growth in the Indo-Pacific region, and the political shifts we face are the first reason to support this bill. Countries in the Indo-Pacific are expected to drive the majority of global growth between now and 2050. I want to continue this government's work to deepen our relationships with this region and support the shared security and prosperity. We've signed the AUKUS Pact with the US and Australia. We've signed the Hiroshima Accords with Japan. We've become a dialogue partner of ASEAN and agreed groundbreaking digital deals with Singapore. Membership of this vast global trade area is the next vital step on this journey, putting the UK at the heart of a group of some of the world's most dynamic economies. It will bring us even closer on pressing challenges like climate change. It will give us a new impetus to influence geopolitical competition around rules and norms. And it will help diversify our supply chains and therefore support our economic resilience. My Lords, the second reason for passing this bill are the economic benefits that this deal brings to the UK. Britain will join 11 countries spanning Asia and the Americas with a combined population of 500 million people. We'll have a combined GDP worth nearly 12 trillion, 15% of global GDP. This deal positions British companies to expand in new markets, giving us, for instance, our first trade deal with Malaysia, an economy worth almost £330 billion last year. And it means more than 99% of the UK's current exports to other members become eligible for tariff-free trade. The deal's ambitious service provisions should also boost the £32 billion of services that British firms already sell to these countries last year. UK businesses will be operating more on a par with local firms. Red tape can be cut and data localization requirements removed. Traders will have more certainty, and it looks set to increase our attractiveness to global finance, even as competition for capital grows ever more intense. Investors like Japanese firm Fujitsu, employer of more than 7,000 people here in Britain, see great promise from this deal. Free trade is good for British businesses, creating new opportunities and spurring innovation. And I firmly believe it benefits British consumers as well. Tariff reductions mean cheaper import prices, better choice and higher quality on a whole range of things, whether it is fruit juice from Peru or vacuum cleaners from Malaysia. The final reason for your support, my Lords, is the precise scope of the bill. While the deal itself is wide-ranging, in many areas it does not require comprehensive UK legislation. The bill therefore focuses on those few areas where we need primary legislation to meet our new obligations. First, it covers technical barriers to trade. Conformity assessment bodies like the British Standards Institute, they exist to ensure consumers that a product meets certain standards. And the bill will allow for conformity assessment bodies established in other participating countries to apply for approval here in the UK. But I can assure noble Lords, these provisions will not change British product standards. Next, government procurement. The bill will ensure that suppliers from participating countries have access on an equal footing to those UK procurements covered by the agreement. And we've responded to the devolved administration's previous concerns about the use of concurrent powers in such bills, drafting these provisions in consultation with them. And I believe that shows our commitment to working across all nations of the UK to forge a common approach. Finally, on intellectual property, the bill will align our approach to copyright with that of other members. For instance, it will expand the basis on which foreign performers can qualify for rights here in the UK. It will also align our approach to geographical indications and designations of origin, which I'm happy to say is good news for things like Lincolnshire sausages, cheddar cheese, and of course, Scotch whisky. In each of these specific areas, UK bodies and businesses will benefit from corresponding treatment in other participating countries. The bill therefore reduces a whole series of complex obstacles to trade: copyright, patent, standards, public procurement. These points are often underappreciated, but they will benefit UK businesses and consumers alike. Now, noble lords may well ask whether these benefits come at the expense of things we should hold dear. I believe this is not the case, and I want to run through some of the concerns that have been expressed. Will it lower our own high standards on food and product safety, on animal welfare, or on environment or workers' rights? No. We will change none of these in order to exceed, and we will continue to set our own standards here in the UK. What about the issue of undercutting farmers? There are both quotas and transitional safeguards for agricultural imports that we negotiated. And National Farmers Union President Minette Batters has spoken of the deal's potential, as she put it, to get even more fantastic British food on plates overseas. There are often concerns expressed about the NHS and so-called privatisation by the back door. Let me be clear, the NHS and its services were never on the table in these negotiations. And if you want to see the government do more in this Pacific region to end unsustainable palm oil farming or champion human rights, this agreement will increase UK influence in the region, which we can bring to bear on all of these vital issues. Ultimately, we retain flexibility with this deal. We'll continue to set our standards, determine our foreign policy, and make the trade arrangements that best suit us with others in the future. My Lords, I'm looking forward to hearing as much as possible of the forthcoming debate. I might have to be excused before it ends should business continue into the evening to welcome the President of South Korea at the state banquet tonight hosted by His Majesty the King. The opposition front bench has been very generous and understanding on this point, and I want to thank them. I want to thank also my noble friend Lord Johnson of Lainston, who has brought enormous private sector experience into the government. He's led the work on this bill and will respond to all your questions when closing. It is a narrow bill, but the benefits are considerable. With others queuing up to join CPTPP, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has ensured the UK got in there first. The deal offers possibilities for our whole country, from distilleries in Dorset to AI pioneers in Wales to car park manufacturers in Northern Ireland to digital forensic experts in Scotland. It is an investment in a brighter future. And I should know, because I was the future once.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time.
My Lords, can I congratulate the noble Lord on his maiden speech to this House and, of course, welcome him back to Parliament. And can I reassure him on one vital point? The opposition are at one with the government on support for Ukraine, and that will continue. This Parliament is united and this country is united on that issue. Just picking up one of the points the noble Lord mentioned, of course, in his last PMQs to the other place, he reminded MPs that he had once been the future. And of course now Rishi Sunak has now given him a chance to go back to the future without the need for a DeLorean. However, given the recent high turnover in foreign secretaries, I fear time might not be on his side. The noble Lord may not be aware, but I have repeatedly praised his legacy on global development, international development, following on from the leadership given by Gordon Brown. And of course, in his foreword to the International Development White Paper published yesterday, the noble Lord reminded us that 10 years ago he co-chaired a panel for the United Nations on the future of development. The subsequent report paved the way for the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring that no one was left behind. I mention this because some of the key concerns we have on this legislation relate to the impact on the world's ability to achieve these goals by 2030. And whilst we do welcome the accession to the CPTPP, it does not make up for the failure to deliver on the international trade deal that was due in October for India, or the US trade deal promised by the end of 2022. And I would point out to the noble lord that his department, or the department responsible for this bill, projected that the CPTPP deal would offer less than 1% to our GDP. And even this has been subject to doubt by the Secretary of State. My lords, one concern, in fact I'd say it's our foremost concern in relation to this deal, is the investor-state dispute settlement provisions. Due to the economic, what we need to understand, do the economic benefits outweigh the risks to jobs, workers' rights and sovereignty that this association brings? My lords, the type of corporate court system allows foreign companies to sue the governments for any actions that they argue could affect their profits. A system used in the past to challenge increases in the minimum wage and countries' attempts to bring public services back into public ownership. And what is astonishing is that the government did not have to subject itself to such legal shackles. When New Zealand joined CPTPP, it opted out of the ISDS system with the countries that invested most in New Zealand. But the UK government asked for no such exemption, which we had with Australia and New Zealand trade deals. Why not? Why not? Surely that's the sort of reassurance the noble lord, the Minister, the Foreign Secretary referred to. The TUC and the Trade Justice Movement and Greenpeace have all argued its presence pose a threat to rights, jobs and sovereignty. They will argue, and I draw this specifically to the attention of the noble lord, Lord Cameron, that it will undermine SDG 8 on fair labour laws, making it easier for goods that are made with exploited labour to be dumped on the UK market, and make it easier for unethical companies and investors to do business with countries where it's easier to exploit workers. They also argue that the ISDS court system means that protection to workers' rights, such as those around safe working hours in the UK, could be challenged by multinational corporations who could argue that such protections affect their profits. And we know that jobs in manufacturing in the UK are already being threatened by cheap imports of goods such as steel and aluminium from Vietnam, some of which, of course, as we've heard, is actually produced in China but routed through Vietnam to avoid the anti-dumping tariffs that the UK has on Chinese goods. According to the TUC, CPTPP is likely to increase the dumping of goods from Vietnam by providing it with more access to the UK market. Could the noble lord, in his response today, tell us whether the government has made any assessment of those risks? How about an assessment on the number of British jobs in steel, aluminium and other UK manufacturing industries that could be put at risk as a result? Well, there was also nowhere in any of the intergovernmental discussions on China's potential membership of the CPTPP has there been any mention of its record on human rights. The text of the treaty itself contains no meaningful enforceable clauses on this issue. And of course, all members of this House will be aware of the text of the Genocide Amendment passed on the trade bill put forward by the noble Lord Alton. And I hope the noble Lord the Minister can tell us in his response whether the government has assessed China's application to join CPTPP against the risks and challenges set out in the Integrated Review Refresh. It's vital that we have clear transparency on this issue so that we know the implications. This opposition has put forward very clearly the need for an absolute long-term strategy on China. And what we will see is potentially attempts through backdoor ways to change our strategy on that. My Lords, the noble Lord, the Secretary of State mentioned intellectual property. And in advance of the negotiations, of course, the International Agreements Committee highlighted the two issues, namely that CTPP rules directly conflict with the European Patent Convention, and accepting them could jeopardise the UK's continued membership of the European Patent Office. Secondly, CPTP also introduces a mandatory procedure for notifying the patent holder when seeking authorisation for generic or biosimilar medicine, and this would result, despite what the noble Lord said, potentially in higher medicine prices for the NHS. Now, of course, it is welcome that the government listened to concerns in this area and has ensured its existing international commitments have been protected, as well as protections for geographical indications and performers in other CPTP countries. But can the noble Lord, in his response, confirm that this means no risk to the NHS in terms of higher medicine prices? And of course, despite what the noble Lord said in his introduction, concerns remain regarding access to the UK agricultural market, such as Canada's desire to gain greater market access to our beef market. And, you know, I think we need to hear the specific safeguards that have been secured for UK agriculture. And, of course, on the issue of food standards, which have been raised by the NFU and the RSPC, amongst others, I understand that we are expecting an analysis shortly, but I hope again the noble Lord the Minister will give us reassurances from the dispatch box today on these issues. Could I also ask what further assessment the government has made on the accession's impact on the UK's ability to hit its climate and environmental targets? My Lords, as we heard from a previous question this afternoon, I do hope that what we want to ensure is that we have proper level of parliamentary scrutiny, which in the past on trade deals has been severely limited. And of course, the International Agreements Committee is still undertaking its inquiry into CPTPP. And of course, written submissions have closed, but they're currently in the middle of collecting all of the evidence. And I would repeat the question that my noble friend Baroness Hayter made in questions this afternoon. Give us a categorical assurance that that report will be fully debated in this House before this agreement is finalised. This is what Parliament means. This is what sovereignty is about. And let's ensure there is a debate on these issues.
Yeah. My Lords, it is a pleasure to be the first speaker from this side of the House to congratulate my noble friend, as I must call him now, to congratulate my noble friend on his excellent maiden speech and to welcome him to these benches. Time flies. Today I am welcoming, doesn't seem so long ago, I was begging him not to resign as Prime Minister. My Lords, it's a notable day for the House of Lords when we welcome a former Prime Minister who is also the new Foreign Secretary. Whatever the House of Commons may think, it's indisputably good for the House of Lords to have an additional Cabinet Minister in its ranks. My Lords, he is the first former Prime Minister to return to Cabinet rank since Alec Douglas Hume over 50 years ago. Before the war, it was quite the norm, with Baldwin, Ramsay MacDonald and Chamberlain all returning to government. It's a mystery to me why we have today still this self-defeating idea that former Prime Ministers should never return to frontline politics. And I'm glad that the noble Lord has broken that rule. My Lords, many people were surprised at the appointment of my noble friend. I was not wholly surprised. I hope I'm not breaking any confidence, and my noble friend has probably forgotten, but about a year ago we had a conversation when I asked him whether he would ever be interested in perhaps a big international job or perhaps becoming Foreign Secretary. He wasn't wholly convincing in his denial that he wasn't remotely interested. And what I do know about the noble Lord is that he strongly believes in public service, and that is the reason why he is sitting where he is today. The noble Lord and I go back quite some way to when we both worked in the Treasury. He was always my brilliant spad. He was the master of detail and of strategy. I always thought that he would go far and would have achieved high office. But what I didn't foresee was the rapidity with which he did so, becoming leader of the party in 2005, only 4 years after entering the Commons, and Prime Minister 5 years later. We had some difficult times together. There was one moment when the noble Lord gave me a present. He may have forgotten this. It was a long mahogany box, about a foot long, and it contained the biggest Cuban cigar you could possibly imagine. There was a yellow notelet attached to it, which had, in his handwriting on it, the words, "By the time you smoke this, all your troubles will be over." Well, my lords, I never smoked it. I still have it. And at times when I was watching my noble friend as Prime Minister, I was tempted to send it back to him. But he would never have had need of it because he has huge resilience. I need hardly say he faces huge challenges as Foreign Secretary. It is a dangerous world. One thing we know is that when you have an unbelievably large number of difficult problems in politics, there's always another unexpected one coming round the corner. The noble Lord, however, has the ability and experience to face these difficulties. This House has great experience in global affairs, and there is a degree of common ground between the two sides of the House. And the whole House, therefore, will wish to support him and wish him well. As they say, we look forward to hearing him again. My Lords, I welcome this bill today. Before I move on to the actual detail of the bill, I would just like to make one general point about trade, which worries me very considerably. And that is that the whole world, including the UK, is slipping back into protectionism. The retreat from globalization is in danger of going too far. Yes, we've had the shocks of COVID and of the war in Ukraine. And the emphasis has been on words like resilience, security of supply, strategic autonomy, self-sufficiency. But too often, these words are just disguised protectionism. Every sector considers itself strategic. We've got to be self-sufficient in everything from cheese to steel. That is not the way to go. That is the way to becoming uncompetitive and poorer. Of course, we have to pay some regard to the risks of supply that have emerged in recent years. But the answer to uncertainty of supply is to diversify your suppliers, not always to reach towards self-sufficiency. We ought to recognize that a policy of self-sufficiency comes at a price to living standards and a price also to the cost of living. Let us not forget that the globalization of recent years raised living standards. Sure, there were losers in Europe as well as gainers, and the world as a whole gained a huge amount. Freedom of trade is not just an abstract idea. It is a positive instrument for improving the condition of people worldwide. We should also remember that in the 1930s, the retreat to protectionism was one of the factors that, combined with others, contributed to the Great Depression. I would also, as I know my noble friend Lord Hannan also often quotes. I very much believe in I think it was the John Bright's idea that trade is God's diplomacy, improving relations between countries and improving the stability of the world. And I make this general point because one of the things about the CPTP that I very much approve of is it incorporates a commitment to furthering the cause of free trade, and that is something that I think is extremely important. My noble friend emphasised all the statistics, and I won't repeat them, about the CPTPP area, the growth of population, the extent to which it is supposed to contribute to the growth of the world economy in the next few years, and indeed, I believe half the world's middle-class consumers soon will be around the Pacific Rim. With the UK, the area will combine to be 15% of world GDP. That is roughly the same as that of the EU. But by 2050, the CPTPP will be 25%, whereas the EU will only be 10%. The CPTP, of course, is very different, I need hardly say, from the EU. It's not a customs union. It is not a single market. There is no TPP law, no TPP commission, no move towards a single currency. I note with a degree of scepticism that the government say that our commitment to the CPTP is also furthering free nations. But I note that among our partners, there is one communist single-party state and one Islamic absolute monarchy as well. So I'm not quite sure how that fits in. I'm not in any way criticising it, but this is a free trade area above anything else. Of course, it fits in with the government's political objective of the tilt to the Indo-Pacific region, which was reinforced by the Defence White Paper. A number of commentators, and indeed the noble Lord Collins, have tried to dismiss a little bit the importance of CPTP because of its statistic that it will only contribute, as he put it, less than 1% to growth. I think this ignores the political context of the region and of joining this organisation. Whether the 0.08 statistic that is bandied about is right, perhaps Minister Johnson will comment on this when he comes to wind up, because I noticed in the Sunday Telegraph that the Secretary of State said that she did not believe this figure, which has been officially quoted. But whether the contribution to growth of 0.08% is right or not, it ignores the potential. These are, as my noble friend said, very fast-growing economies, and you can't predict precisely how trade flows will react to very fast-growing economies. Apart from anything else, this is a very deep free trade agreement. I stress it's a free trade agreement, not a single market, not a customs union, but it is a deep free trade agreement. And it has these advantages. It covers services, very important to the UK because we are the second largest exporter of services in the world. For goods, there is a single set of rules of origin which allows all content to be accumulated provided it originates in a CPTP country. There is a good text also on sectors such as digital services, which are of increasing importance, and it also gets rid of the need to have a local office before you can sell services into the market of the bloc. These are very considerable advantages. But as I said before, one has to look at this very much in its political context and the tilt to the Indo-Pacific region. The original TPP, the predecessor of the CPTPP, had the United States in it. Had the United States remained in it and President Trump not withdrawn from it, it would be one of the largest trading blocs in the world, amounting to 30% of world GDP. And with 30% of world GDP, we would have been in a very strong position with our allies there to play a huge part in influencing the rules governing the world economy. Originally, the the United States was hoping that by joining the TPP, as at one stage it was planning to do, that it would be able to constrain the role of China in setting the rules of the world economy. So we must hope that the United States will think again. I know President Biden said initially that he might be interested in rejoining and then has lately tried to distance himself from it. But it would be very important if America did join, because the CPTPP, has strong rules, much stronger rules than the WTO about state-owned enterprises, which has been one of the main ways in which the Chinese have been criticized for how they compete unfairly with companies in the West. My Lords, the United States, in response, has also set up the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, a bloc that includes Indonesia. Perhaps the noble Lord Johnson, when he winds up, would comment on this, how he sees the relationship between the two. To many it appears that the latest one that America set up is largely just a high-level discussion forum. It will not really be a rival to the CPTP, but it would be interesting to know what the US government has told him about this. My Lords, I welcome this bill. I welcome our joining the CPTP. I think it points the way to a very exciting future, which we should be very eager to grasp and do our full part in it.
Yeah. My Lords, I rise as the first speaker from these benches to congratulate the noble Lord Cameron on his appointment as Foreign Secretary and welcome him to this House. In recent years, we have a tradition of welcoming new and often inexperienced and young peers. I don't think any of those adjectives apply to the noble lord, but I must add my congratulations to everybody. I'd like particularly to congratulate him on what he's done today, because of course this was a highly technical bill and normally there would be only 8 or 10 speakers speaking in it, and when it was rumoured that he was speaking, suddenly we had 27, including a lot of people who've never expressed any interest in trade or trade bills. So congratulations to the noble lord on that. As I said, this is a highly technical bill, but all the previous speakers have clearly taken an opportunity for more general comments before getting to the detail of the bill. Now, we were told in 2016 that a major advantage of Brexit would be our ability to make trade deals ourselves outside the ambit of the European Union. And Liz Truss, when she was the relevant minister, used to boast that over 50 to 60 trade deals had been agreed since Brexit. Well, the truth is that in all but 3 cases, the deal consisted simply of snowpaking out the word EU and substituting the word UK. In all other respects, our trading arrangements with the countries in question remained unaltered. Now, the first 2 original agreements were with Australia and New Zealand, both, of course, criticised by the farming community. Nevertheless, we have those deals now. And now we have the comprehensive and progressive agreement for a Trans-Pacific partnership known as CPTPP, which we signed up to in July this year. Now, Lord Lamont has touched on this, but I fear that, as usual, the government has overblown the potential impact of our joining the CPTPP. As the noble Lord Collins indicated, it's the government's own figures that said that there would be a minimum impact on our economy, under 1% effect on GDP. Now, I take the noble Lord Lamont's point. We are a member of a club which is in a fast-growing area. We, of course, apart from Malaysia and Brunei, we already have trade deals with all the other countries, which obviously clearly affects those numbers. But as the noble Lord Cameron did indicate, there clearly will be opportunities in due course for Malaysia. So I do accept that we are part of a growing economic area, and being inside the tent may bring future economic benefits, which we may be not able to forecast at present. But I think it would be helpful, as the Noble Lord Lamont indicated, if when the Noble Lord the Minister replied, he could be more specific about what future advantages the government sees in our membership of the CPTPP. Now, if I could just turn to the technical parts of the bill, which is, as has been indicated, highly technical and needs to be passed simply so that we can sign up to this agreement. Obviously, joining the CPTPP has been criticised from a number of quarters. There are concerns over agricultural risks, including pesticides and palm oil, which have been touched on. There are concerns over labour and human rights, and no doubt other colleagues will touch on these concerns. But I would like to focus on the changes to copyright law contained in the bill and the criticisms by a number of relevant organisations, including the Alliance for Intellectual Property. Now, there's no doubt that the treaty has brought little benefit, direct benefit, to the United Kingdom creative industries. The main achievement, which the Noble Lord Collins touched on, is that the agreement regarding IP rights enabled the UK to remain compliant with the European Patent Convention, which was a fear to begin with. Now, the bill also provides for changes to copyright laws so that foreign rights holders and performers receive payment where they do not currently. Now, as I read it, and I may perfectly well be wrong, as may the NGO, the bill as it stands does not limit the extension to CPTPP countries, so it allows the government to extend the benefits to right holders and performers in any country, whether or not a reciprocal arrangement is in place. And this is particularly important if there's were to be a proposal to extend to the United States. Now, I understand that the IP Office has said that a consultation on extending the right to all foreign holders and performers will be concurrent with the passage of this bill. But this means, if this is the case, that the result of the consultation will be too late for proper legislative scrutiny.
Hear, hear.
So can I ask, first of all, why are the changes to the copyright laws not limited only to CPTPP country rights holders and performers on the face of the bill? Secondly, does the government intend to extend the right to all countries, whether or not there is reciprocity? And thirdly, does the government intend to consult on these wide rights extensions? Now, as I've said, my lords, this is not a trivial issue, as widening of rights would result in a net loss of revenue retained by UK rights holders, as revenue would shift towards foreign rights holders without reciprocal arrangements. And that is particularly of concern vis-à-vis the United States, which is, of course, a significant player in the whole recording music industry. How we seek to amend the bill from these benches will depend on the Minister's answers.
Hear, hear.
Well, look, we have a very nice tradition in this House of always warming and welcoming maiden speeches. In this, we usually do it because we're a nice, polite House. In this case, we do it because we really, genuinely do warmly welcome the Foreign Secretary to join us, and we greatly admire the maiden speech that he's just made. We genuinely do. There's something wonderfully Alice in Wonderland and ironic about the fact that his maiden speech is made in a debate on an implementing bill which will implement a treaty which we have not yet seen. It's not been presented to us. We're going to debate the detail of a bill which will put on the statute book the necessary changes because it is assumed that we will agree that we should accede to the CPTPP. Of course, it's not an unrealistic assumption because we in this House can do absolutely nothing to stop our acceding to the CPTPP, which is another nicely Alice in Wonderland. Actually, I wouldn't want to. I think it is a very good thing that we are acceding to the CTP, but I do hope that the the Foreign Secretary will find time to consider the paradox that we are stuck here on pre-Brexit arrangements for scrutinising and approving trade agreements, even though post-Brexit we no longer have, as our trade negotiators, the Christopher Soameses and the Leon Brittons, the Cathy Ashtons, the Peter Mandelsons. We no longer have the right in the Council of Ministers to give them a mandate. We no longer have a Parliament, European Parliament, scrutinising everything they do in a trade negotiation. And we no longer, therefore, have select committees in this House and the other place scrutinising very closely what our ministers say in the Council of Ministers and seeing what, all done in public. Since Brexit, trade policy is a black box. Westminster is in the dark. Whitehall has taken back absolute control. It doesn't feel quite right to me. I don't suppose the Foreign Secretary will have the time or possibly the inclination to consider amending the 2010 arrangements, the Cragg Act. But I do hope that successor Foreign Secretaries will, because the Alice in Wonderland arrangements are all very funny and so on, but it's not right. I also hope that he will, the Foreign Secretary might consider why the International Agreements Committee of this House has so regularly called for the publication of government trade strategy. Most grown-up governments publish a trade strategy. I'm a member of the International Agreements Committee. We've repeatedly called for one. Not knowing what the government is trying to achieve makes it quite tricky to work out, looking at each individual negotiation and its outcome, how far they've achieved their aim. I'm not naive. I suspect that I've just described what some trade secretaries would regard as the best feature of our arrangement, since it's not possible to say against any overall guideline whether they've done well or not. They can tell us that they've done jolly well. And as previous speakers have indicated, some trade secretaries tend to do that a bit. The mistrust, for example, as Lord Russell has said, most of the agreements which he presented were simple rollovers of the existing pre-Brexit arrangements, but all her geese were swans. Some of them were most of them were perfectly respectable geese, but they had to be presented as swans. I hope the Foreign Secretary will seek to persuade his trade colleague, and I think she's more open to the idea, to listen to the recommendation for this place that the government should publish an overall trade strategy. But let me reassure you, I think the task of seeing this bill through the House will not be an onerous one, and I believe that accession to the CPTPP is a swan, or at least a signet that might, over time, grow into a perfectly respectable swan. On the question of what it's worth economically in the short term, I heard the Noble Lord Lamont. It is, of course, the government's own impact assessment which says that in the short term there won't be much economic benefit. And the government's economic impact assessment has taken, it says, full account of the likely dynamic, on which I agree with the Noble Lord Lamont, how the region is likely to grow. What the impact assessment actually says is that UK GDP could, as a result of CPTPP, increase by the equivalent of £2 billion in the long run. And it defines in the long run as by 2040. Now, I would agree with those who say, and indeed the impact assessment says, that all such long-range predictions have extremely wide margins of error. But I think it is important to remember that the government themselves thought the central estimate of the likely financial benefit was £2 billion in the long term, in other words, by about a third of 1% of GDP. Not a lot, and the reason is, of course, because we have existing free trade agreements with all CPTPP partners except Brunei and Malaysia. But I believe over time this agreement will deepen and widen and become genuinely significant, so I am glad that the government have decided to get us on board. I hope the government will set out for us during the course of our study of this bill how they see the future of the organisation. Do they believe, as I do, though I think Noble Lord Lamont would disagree with me, that to be effective it will need to acquire some sort of permanent secretariat, possibly even a site, S-I-T-E. Do the government believe that it will need to consider enforcement mechanisms? I do. And what is the government view of CPTPP accession and of the 6 outstanding applications, including the Chinese application, which, if accepted, in my view very unlikely, would be transformative, in my view very undesirably. The Noble Lord Collins was right to call for transparency on this. I think we need to know what the government think is the future of the organisation we're getting into. Of course, it would be a perfect subject to be covered in a trade strategy document, which could also perhaps explore the wider issue of the future of the multilateral rules-based system, whether it has a future, or whether the future is bilateral and plurilateral arrangements like CPTPP. I'm with Lord Lamont on this. I'm a free trader, and I believe that the best for free trade is the widest possible global rules. Simple rules, but as wide as possible. But there are 2 obvious problems which he and I have to face. First, American protectionism. I warmly agree with what he said. It was free-trading Republicans under Robert Dole who got the United States into WTO, but that breed seems to be extinct, and their successors have destroyed the WTO court. Second problem, China. Now the world's #1 trading power. Together with the rest of the global south, they don't mind global rules, but they don't see why they should remain the rules we set 75 years ago, in the very different era of Bretton Woods. And they have a point. We have been very slow to update the structures we built. Why have 7 of the 10 heads of the WTO been Europeans, like all 12 heads of the IMF, with all 14 heads of the World Bank coming from America? There is room for new thinking on effective internationalism and on the institutions that should underpin a rules-based trading system. And there's a perfect task for an experienced new Foreign Secretary to consider. Meanwhile, let's welcome accession to the CPTPP and welcome his arrival in this House.
It's an enormous pleasure to listen and to follow the Noble Lord Kerr.
I get the pleasure of doing that quite frequently because he sits on the committee, the International Agreements Committee, which I've got the honour to chair. And I want to say something about that because this explains why I don't actually intend to say very much in my remarks today. And there are two reasons for that. One is, as has been pointed out, this is a technical bill. It deals with some important but quite limited aspects of the CPTPP. And I do not want, as the chair of the IFC, to allow this debate to appear to be the debate on the whole of the treaty, which, as the noble Baroness Lady Hayter said in the earlier question, we want to see on the floor of the House. It's important that we do. It's important that we have scrutiny, and I very much hope that the noble Lord, I have to call him, the new Foreign Secretary, agrees with that. It's also the reason why, and I say this to the noble Lord Johnson, the reason I didn't contribute very much to the briefing that he held very kindly for peers recently was, again, because for the two reasons I'm going to add and break, I didn't think it was right to get too deeply into the subject. So the one reason is this is quite a technical bill. The second reason is because the committee which I chair is in the middle, as has been mentioned already, of an inquiry. And I don't want to preempt the outcome of that inquiry or the views that the members will have about the treaty as a result of that. I'll tell you where we've got to. We called for evidence between July and September. We had 27 submissions. We've had 3 oral evidence sessions already and intend to have further. We've had specialists in trade and foreign policy who've given evidence to us already. We will hear from diplomatic representatives of at least 2 countries. And I'm therefore very keen that we should see the full results of the scrutiny that we're doing and place that before the House. We've had interesting evidence already, and I do invite noble lords to look at the evidence that's been given. For example, the government may be interested to note that one of our witnesses, an expert and experienced witness, said that so poor is the government's information about free trade arrangements that some businesses look to other countries' websites to find out what the answer is to questions, to find out how actually to navigate our own arrangements. They've also pointed out that the data is so difficult sometimes that some data seems to show that a country is a net importer and other that it's a net exporter. These need to be dealt with. They're additional matters. But the fundamental point is that when we complete our debate, when we complete our scrutiny, we will have very clear views, I believe, on the treaty. So I don't want to, as I say, preempt that today. I therefore will not say anything further about the detail of the bill, but listen very carefully to what is said and study that and the rest of the proceedings on this bill and look forward to coming back when we're in a position to do as we intend to do, present our report to the House fully on the bill and on the treaty.
My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble Lord Goldsmith, and I welcome the scrutiny that he's bringing to trade policy and look forward to his report being presented to the House. It's a very good example of why this House does such good work behind the scenes, non-partisan and detailed work which really does inform government policy. My Lords, I am here for a specific reason, but obviously it's a welcome coincidence that I'm here at the same time as my noble friend Lord Cameron has made his maiden speech in the House. I have to say it was a great pleasure to serve under him when he was Prime Minister. I was, in fact, his longest serving minister because I was the last Cameroon to be sacked by Theresa May. I think somebody had to remind her that I was still a minister. And I have to say, when I heard the news that Lord Cameron was joining your Lordship's House, I had a bittersweet reaction. I was overjoyed that he was joining our House, and I was then fed up with the endless WhatsApps from people saying, why hasn't Rishi Sunak asked you to join his government? So I hope normally this House sits out the heady 24 hours of a reshuffle. I have to say as well that my noble friend is joining an absolutely first-class front bench. I said to Lord Ahmed yesterday that I was amazed he could still get into the House given the praise that was heaped on him in the Foreign Affairs debate last week. And of course, Lord Johnson is proving to be a fantastic and very creative, I have to say, Trade Minister, full of original and exciting ideas. I did have a ditty about Lord Johnson, which unfortunately has been overtaken by events, which was he was introduced on a Monday, made his maiden on a Wednesday, and was sacked on a Friday by accident. So he is the first comeback kid of the front bench, but he has been reinstated by the Prime Minister, and we are thankful for that. I think I'm right in saying that my noble friend, the Foreign Secretary, was the first Prime Minister, or maybe the first Prime Minister for many decades, to visit Vietnam. And that was a very big occasion because I, at the time, I became the trade envoy to Vietnam and hadn't realised quite what an economic powerhouse it is. And it is a representative of the Southeast Asian nations. The CPTPP, which we are debating as part of this enabling bill, is very important. It's very important that the UK has joined it because it represents part of a strategic pivot, a continuing strategic pivot, the latest strategic pivot, if you like, to the most dynamic and fastest growing region in the world, the Indo-Pacific. And it puts us in a place where we can really have some kind of influence on the future trade policy of that region. And at the heart of the Indo-Pacific is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And the big reveal is that I am the chair of the UK ASEAN Business Council. So I'm tremendously excited about the prospects that the CPTPP brings to ASEAN and the wider region. We have now an ambassador to the ASEAN region, now Sarah Tiffin. We have a trade commissioner for the region, and as the Foreign Secretary pointed out, we are a strategic dialogue partner of ASEAN. And to pick up on Lord Goldsmith's excellent points, one of the reasons that the UK ASEAN Business Council, although it is a very small organisation, is important is because it is an opportunity to hear from businesses about what is happening on the ground in the region, and to hear, indeed, sometimes their frustrations with how opaque some of the guidance and regulations are from government. I was told by one member, for example, the Department of Trade does have a tool which it has purchased and paid for, a kind of artificial intelligence tool that would allow individual small businesses to search for their products and which would throw up, thanks to artificial intelligence, the easiest countries in the world with which to trade based on their product and based on a reading of those treaties. There is a huge amount of work that can be done to make it easier for businesses to navigate the trade agreements that government puts in place. And I know you can't have an ambassador to a treaty, but it is certainly important, I think, for the Foreign Secretary to take from this debate that there is an opportunity to look hard at how we do engage on the back of the opportunities that the CPTPP gives us. Because, as he pointed out, 580 million people in 12 countries with a combined GDP of £12 trillion. 4 of them are members of ASEAN: Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore and Vietnam. The Philippines and Thailand, also ASEAN nations, have both expressed an interest in joining, and they have seen how others have benefited. The noble Lord Kerr was talking about what economic growth this might bring to us, and he's quite right to say that the estimates are almost impossible to hold on to. One estimate was a 0.08% over 15 years, and obviously as a die-hard Remainer before I became chair of the UK ASEAN Business Council, I might have derided this and said to the Brexiteers, well, this is what you've given us in return for leaving the EU. But I'm now a wiser person. The UK already has free trade agreements with most of the CPTPP members, and the important point to note is obviously the CPTPP will grow and expand regardless of the issue of China, so it will grow. And also, as the first non-Pacific country to join, it also encourages economies looking to be part of a free and open trading club. In that sense, the UK genuinely has led the way. And in this digital world, the connectivity infrastructure already exists, which allows British businesses to provide services to anywhere in the world. So as part of the CPTPP, we can enable our trade infrastructure to connect our businesses to CPTP members. Services to trade to CPTP members last year was 43% of our total services trade. We don't need to establish regional or local offices in order to supply CPTP countries, and also it's very exciting to see companies anywhere in the UK now being able to access markets like Malaysia and Vietnam. And another point I would make is that many of these countries do actually look to the UK for guidance and support in terms of digital trade. The agreement we signed with Singapore is groundbreaking. We are seen as a leader in this field, and we should certainly use our influence in that regard. It will also bring additional benefits over and above our free trade agreements. For example, we do have a free trade agreement with Vietnam. It was the original EU agreement rolled over, but it means, as part of the CPT, our tariffs on engines, for example, will come down quicker, and I know the Foreign Secretary will be pleased to hear that tariffs on chocolate and port will also be lowered at a faster rate, as well as duties on beef. Duties will actually be eliminated. And also, for example, people travelling to do business in Vietnam will now be able to stay for 6 months instead of 3 months. We now have a free trade agreement, thanks to the CPTPP, with Malaysia and Brunei as well. Brunei is an important ally and home to the largest UK military presence in the Asia-Pacific. And while our bilateral trade with Brunei is small, our relationship with Brunei is an excellent example of how we can work with some of the smaller economies in large trading blocs and shape the future of the region. So the real value, though, is also strategic. Last week, our Secretary for Business and Trade, Kenny Badenoch, was in San Francisco for the first CPTP meeting since July. The meeting was held on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, leaders meeting, discussing free trade in Asia-Pacific. And being part of the CPTPP, therefore, allows the UK to be there on the sidelines of the APAC meeting. One of the things I've learnt since I became chair of the UK ASEAN Business Council is there is something called the APEC Business Travel Card. And it allows, it's effectively, and I don't want to upset any noble lords in the chamber, it effectively allows free movement within the region. Allows short-term business travel, streamlines the entry process, and fast-tracks visitors. You can use an APEC business travel card lane at airports in APEC economies. And again, this is the kind of opportunity, it seems to me, that presents itself to the government to push for now it has a seat at this table. My lords, the real benefit of joining the CPP is just that, being part of a club, if you like, that the UK has not been part of before. Being part of the CPT, the UK has a seat at the table of some of the world's most dynamic economies, committed, as most of us are, to free and fair trade. The work is just beginning. The work to shape our future begins now.
And my lords, like others, I very warmly welcome the return to government of, and indeed the entry into our councils here in this House, of someone with as much deep familiarity with world diplomacy and world politics as my noble friend Lord Cameron. In fact, a long time ago, a decade or more ago, I had the privilege of serving in a minor role in his administration, rather more minor actually than I'd hoped for, but nevertheless extremely interesting, where we were dealing with the Commonwealth, which is really all part of the repositioning of Britain. This was pre-Brexit, but nevertheless many of the forces which are driving us along today were existing then, and of course in international, as Minister for International Energy Security. With hindsight, I don't think I did a very good job with that. Certainly we've run into a lot of problems since. But this is a good moment, and I'm very pleased. There are, of course, he inherits an appalling set of problems. There are no immediate solutions to any of the major crises that this nation is facing, or the whole world is facing, at the present time. There is poison in every single chalice. The skill lies, and is going to lie, in handling the issues. The skill lies in deploying new compounds of persuasive soft power and decisive hard power. They go together, they can't operate separately, and in new understanding of the world of networks in which we now live. This means seeing the world order or disorder, as it is now, through the eyes of others as well as our own, and through the eyes of the future as well as our own past history. It means ceaselessly creating new alliances, swiftly, to meet endlessly unfolding new crises. And I think this is the enlightened and agile sort of diplomacy we're now going to need to survive over the next decades of this century. So, in my view, our new Foreign Secretary should be judged not by instant diplomatic successes. I suppose the media will have a shot at that he chalks up, but by whether there is a real understanding that our nation is in an entirely new position, requiring many different sorts of alliances backed by huge ingenuity and constant resilience and readiness to recognise the total new factors at work in the international landscape. We need a restart from a fresh realisation. It is that nowadays, in this digital age, most nations, large and small, want to be free of too much Chinese hegemony and pressure on that side, with all its traps and dangers, of which you can see a great deal going on, and from too much over-assertive leadership and stale ideology served up from the Western side as well, from some parts of the American establishment. It is partners people want, not overbearing bosses that they need. So, my lords, coming to this, the treaty and the legislation needed to, which we're passing, we need to bring this treaty into effect. The noble Lord Goldsmith had just described a moment ago that in the committee which he so ably chairs, we are scrutinising the CPTPP arrangements and the treaty and the details very seriously indeed. And of course, there will be a lot more work to be done, and no doubt we shall have an opportunity in this chamber to proceed with these things, but always remembering that the complexity is of just the kind where a committee and committee inquiry is the most effective way of getting at the details. Later on in the chamber we can deal with the legal aspects, but if we really want to go into the depth of the detail, it is in the committee and in the committee environment that we will succeed in doing that. My lords, I regard the treaty as a step in a strategic shift of the first importance for our nation. And I'm glad to see that the impact document echoes that sentiment as well. There are many more steps to be taken in the same direction, but this is one which some of us have been urging for the UK to move towards for at least the last decade, if not more. The ministers are quite right to depict membership of the CPTPP as a gateway or a pathway to high-growth Asian markets, and as all part of our Indo-Pacific tilt. That's the point which the Cabinet Office Integrated Review, version 2, makes very clearly indeed. And of course, there will now have to be a version 3, I'm afraid, in the light of more developments in the Middle East, and that third one will also need to reinforce that same message. This is part of a very clear strategy. I know that estimated trade gains look pretty small, as Lord Kerr alluded to. And I think the figure is that there's an extra 4.9 billion worth of trade both ways by 2040, which is not actually very much. But that's because, of course, we have, as Lord Razzle said, we already have trade agreements with most of the members, although not with Malaysia, and any gains from this treaty are coming on top of those existing flows. And more than that, much more than that, the CPTPP is anyway about far more than further increasing our measured volumes of conventional trade with other member states, which are always difficult anyway to estimate. Not only is the group going to expand in number, 3 more have already applied to join, China is obviously wanting to join, and that raises all sorts of tricky developments which we'll have to deal with in due course, and we're examining in the committee. Behind trade deals lie several major new realities about the nature and pattern of trade and exchange in the 21st century, which many people still seem reluctant to face or grasp. My Lords, the first of these is that over the next 30 years, most of the growth of consumer markets and investments will be in the Asian region. We're looking at something here which is already as big as the EU single market, and at new trade and economic groupings like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Programme, which are already larger in overall GDP than the EU. And then of course, there is the link with the ASEAN as a whole, which we are developing at the moment, and at the same time there are huge new infrastructure projects across Eurasia, weaving the whole Asian continent together, but which we hardly have any coverage in our media here. That's the first reason. The second reality is that trade flows and investment of all kinds, direct and financial, both ways, are welded together, each promoting the other. They are inseparable. I wonder if I could ask for a drink to be brought to me. Thank you so much. The third is that half of what we broadly call trade, and which conjures up visions of thousands of containers on giant cargo carriers, is now in fact trade in knowledge products, digital trade, trade in services, data and technology. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Isn't it data and technology innovations? Every installed piece of capital equipment comes with a vast packet of high-tech procedures, personnel and supporting consultancy. We're informed that 42% of all trade with the CPTPP members, with this country, is in services of various kinds. Probably very much higher than that. Fourth, thank you so much. I've got 2 glasses. Ample surplus of water. Fourth, Japan has been of enormous assistance to us on the pathway to membership. Our growing ties on many industrial and technological fronts with Japan, including the enormous Tempest combat aircraft project, are a parallel story, maybe for another day, but hugely important for our future. My Lords, people forget that Japan is still the world's 3rd largest industrial power in terms of underlying stability and conditions favourable to competitive enterprise. In a way, it's vastly ahead of its Chinese neighbour. We should stick to Japan like glue on every front, security included. And incidentally, I declare an interest in past and present links with Japan and 2 of its biggest enterprises, Mitsubishi Electric and Japan Central Railways. Fifth, it's worth noting that when we join the CPTPP, more than half its membership will be members of the Commonwealth network. People may say, what has that got to do with trade? The answer is a very great deal. Not only are matters settled often informally and in the coffee break, rather than over formal transcripts around the negotiating table, the whole trade and investment process works much the best within a broader context of unifying forces and activities ranging from the cultural and artistic to education to scientific research to constantly new thinking in many fields of professional standards and training. And above all, there is a fact of the English-speaking world and a common business language between us all. English, my Lords, contains its own DNA, which grows and which no amount of official disregard or jealousy or historic dislike can eliminate. My Lords, it so happens that the binding values which hold the Commonwealth together today, and indeed cause it to grow and attract new members as now, are just the ones which are the key of significance in the digital age of hyperconnectivity, binding links not just between officialdom and governments, which may seem at odds at times, but the very level of society and interest. These are the things, such as the rule of law, open societies, free speech and free press, independent judiciary, free elections, proper concern for human rights, due process, adherence to international norms and standards, all now becoming part of the survival kit for the planet's army of independent nations, the so-called neo-non-aligned states. My lords, we have to get out of the patronizing habit of bundling so many nations together as the so-called developing world. Every new nation today and every society, maybe even the hermit states like the North Korea, are developing in their different ways, including us here at home as we embark on the great energy transition, which will bring with it a great social development transition as well, on which, incidentally, we have hardly started. And my lords, today the CPTPP needs a hinterland of support and activity and connection if it is to flourish. I was disappointed, frankly, that last year the powerful research wing of ASEAN, which is called ERIA, that's Economic and Research for India and Asia, who wanted to hold a major conference here in London with our leading think tanks and policy groups, was turned away or only offered cooperation on impossible and ridiculous fees and terms. And that's where the FCDO should have stepped in, if they even knew about it. I hope that this lesson of the need for surrounding activity beyond trade itself in the areas of business and culture and science and all the rest, I hope this lesson is now understood in Whitehall and Downing Street, and that steps are even now being taken to bring the right groupings together between all the new Asian powers and the United Kingdom, covering all fronts and at the highest possible level. Trade rides with investment, with security, with culture and values, and with daily connectivity. Please could we not forget that.
My lords, may I also welcome the noble Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton to this chamber. We shall have to get used to using territorial designations because we on these benches have had a Lord Cameron here for a number of years. And my lords, I also welcome the chance to debate this trade bill. But as Lord Goldsmith, I think, alluded to earlier, we are considering rather the cart before the horse here. The Trade and Agriculture Commission report is, I quote, due to be completed by the 30th of November, so we've no sight of that yet. The Section 42 report required under the Agriculture Act of 2020 will then be available after that, and then the formal parliamentary scrutiny under CRAG will follow. So we're being asked to comment on this without the benefit of those important reports, and indeed the International Committee's report as well. So I'm left considering the benefit costs of this agreement. And I well acknowledge, as have been ably and eloquently detailed by previous speakers, the benefits of agreements of this type over and above the financial. But the financial benefits, I have to say, are extremely modest. The government's own estimate, 2 billion additional GDP by 2040, which I find rather underwhelming. So I'm left considering the downsides, the costs, if you like. The concerns I have, and noble lords will be aware of my interests as a veterinary surgeon. My concerns concentrate on animal health and welfare and public health and the health of our farming industry, and also animal health and welfare in the countries which will be supplying us animal products more freely under this agreement. We rightly, and His Majesty's government quite rightly, are proud of our high animal welfare standards. Ministers regularly assure us that we will not lower our standards in negotiating free trade agreements. But with respect, my lords, that is the right answer to the wrong question. The question we should ask is, will countries exporting to the UK raise their standards to our level And the answer in this case is they have no obligations so to do. The organisation World Animal Protection, formerly the World Society for the Protection of Animals, a global charity for animal welfare based here in London, has produced a ranking of 50 countries based on the consideration of 10 indicators covering the most important aspects of animal protection. And in their latest rankings in 2020, all of the countries within the CPTPP agreement have lower rankings than the UK, and only indeed New Zealand arguably comes close to our overall standards. In our quest for free trade agreements, we have yet to set minimum standards for food imports, with the exception of hormone-treated beef, chlorine-washed chicken, and ractopamine in pigs. Ongoing tariff negotiations with Canada and Mexico raise concerns about the potential vulnerability for UK farmers, particularly with regard to eggs, pigs, pig meat and beef meat products produced at standards which are illegal in the UK. Several CPTPP countries still allow practices such as conventional battery cages, banned in the UK since 2012. Similar concerns arise with pig meat imports from the CPTPP members, which employ sow stalls, banned in the UK since 1999. Of particular concern, nationally and globally, for both animal health and public health, is the excessive use of antibiotics in several CPTPP countries, with the attendant risks of importing and spreading antibiotic-resistant bacteria in animal products. And I know this will be a matter of concern to the noble Lord Cameron, who, to his great credit, raised the whole issue of antimicrobial resistance to the top of the political agenda and commissioned the O'Neill Commission to make its very important findings in 2016 about reducing our use of antimicrobials to prevent the severe downsides of antimicrobial resistance. My Lords, at a time when food security is rightly a concern, we should be extremely careful not to handicap, undercut or potentially destroy our own food production capability by importing products produced at lower welfare standards. And at a time when climate change is such a dominant political issue, we should guard against exporting greenhouse gas emissions by importing products produced less efficiently than we do. A relevant example concerns beef, a kilogram of which we can produce in the UK at less than half the global average of associated greenhouse gas emissions. My Lords, we should be aiming not to import beef from any country unless their carbon footprint is lower than ours. In joining the CPTPP, we note that the government's own environmental impact assessment suggests that an increase in global greenhouse gas emissions will occur, but it's slight and it's negligible. But this does not take into account emissions due to transport, nor take account of the potential high starting point of the carbon footprint in the countries of origin. In conclusion, my Lords, I think we need to safeguard the UK's indigenous high-quality, high-welfare and sustainable food production capabilities. That doesn't mean that we require self-sufficiency, not at all. But we should ensure we safeguard a core of essential food production capability. So finally, may I ask the noble Lord the Minister in his reply, when will Parliament see the TAC report? And secondly, in his letter of the 8th of November to their Lordships, Lord Johnson of Lainston stated, quote, "The government has ensured that joining will not compromise our high animal and plant health, food safety or animal welfare standards, unquote. In view of the fact that we cannot influence current standards in member countries of CPTPP, how will this be achieved?
Lords, it's a pleasure to support the government on this important bill at second reading, and also to congratulate my noble friend on his excellent maiden speech. I must say I can't claim quite the same experience of the noble Lord's time as Prime Minister as others who've spoken so far today. I was, for part of the time, a humble bureaucrat in the system working for Vince Cable on EU trade agreements, actually, so when none of us perfect, and then as head of the Scotch Whisky Association. And I must say that at least while I was doing that job, his government either froze or cut the duty on Scotch whisky, to which he alluded in his speech, a policy which has regrettably fallen into abeyance since that point. But perhaps his return to government will herald a change in that policy as well. Who knows? I guess we're going to find out tomorrow. Now, can I pay tribute also in this context, not just to my right honourable friend, the current Secretary of State for Business and Trade, who got this agreement over the line, but also to her three predecessors who kept CPTPP on the agenda when it wasn't obvious that it would stay in it. And I want to single out in particular my right honourable friend Dr. Liam Fox, who kept the prospect of joining CPTPP alive in a government that at times seemed, how shall we say, unduly attached to remaining part of the EU customs union and other trading arrangements. And of course, if they had succeeded in that, it would have precluded CPTPP accession, and we wouldn't be having the discussion that we are having today. So he deserves congratulation on that. Now, just a word about the process that we're in at the moment. I think it's fair to say I don't always agree with my former mentor, Lord Kerr, who spoke earlier, but actually I do agree with the noble Lord on the point he made about the process. I do think it is a little strange that after Brexit, the degree of scrutiny, comment, ability to shape trade agreements that this Parliament, in both of its houses, has, the ability to comment and indeed the ability to vote on major trade agreements, is actually weaker than the country had when we were a member of the European Union. And obviously I worked for Brexit, and I don't think that it is right that we have less ability to shape these things than we did when we were in the European Union. I've said that to select committees of this House and of the other place, and I do think we should look at that in the interests of democratic scrutiny and developing a trade policy that we can all buy into in the future. So I do hope that can be looked at one day. Now, we've heard a lot already about the economic benefits of accession to this trade agreement, and I won't repeat what's been said already, but I do want to highlight a couple of slightly more technical points. First of all, on the rules of origin provisions in this agreement. They are generous, unusually so. They provide for full accumulation, as has been said, and that is potentially of considerable value and will be of particular benefit to firms, perhaps especially SMEs, who are seeking to diversify and make secure their supply chains away from China, perhaps in particular, because I think many are going to need to do that, indeed already are doing it in coming years. And of course, as CPTPP itself enlarges, that is going to become a more worthwhile provision. So again, it's very good to see that we will be part of that. I also want to highlight the value of the arrangements for conformity assessment bodies in Section 2 of this bill. I note, really just in passing, that these arrangements were refused us by the EU during the negotiation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So it's very good to see that, at least in some of our trade agreements, we are part of them, and it is the difference between being part of a trade agreement that is genuinely about facilitating trade and one which is about a power relationship between the two partners. So once again, very good that we're part of that. And of course, it should go without saying, but I don't think it has been said yet, that we get all the benefits of CPTPP without having to pay in £15 billion a year to the budget or make ourselves subject to a foreign court to get them. So much for the economics. The key arguments for CPTPP are, I think, more strategic rather than purely economic, and I just want to highlight three aspects of that briefly. The first is diversification of our own national trade policy. As we all know, increasing openness and competitive forces on our own economy is crucial to boosting productivity and growth. It's not surprising, though a bit disappointing, to hear from some noble lords who've spoken earlier, a set of worries about precisely that openness to competitive forces, whether it's in ISDS, whether it's in food or agriculture or on much else. The problem we've got in this country is not too much competition, but too little. And trade agreements are designed to boost that competition, boost efficiency, bring more growth. Now, indeed, since leaving the EU, we haven't pushed as far as we should in this direction, and indeed our trade policy so far can be seen as, in many ways, a giant preference scheme in favour of the European Union. In particular, that's true in the area of agriculture, where EU goods enter without tariffs and without quotas, and no other trading partners have that at the moment. So it is vital that we open this up, begin to open up our trading options globally, and CPTPP is part of this. Now, it is a bit disappointing, I think, in our accession protocol that the transition to zero tariff access for some agricultural products is a little slow and even includes permanent quotas, I think, in one or two places. Now, I understand the political logic that's led to that, because the NFU is a mighty power in the land. But this is going to defer some of the gains to our consumers. And again, perhaps it's something we might look at one day in the future to take a more liberal approach. Second strategic aspect of CPTPP is about embedding our engagement with East Asia, in particular with close allies like Japan. The Indo-Pacific tilt is clearly, in fact, more than just a tilt, and CPTPP goes with AUKUS and with the ASEAN Dialogue partner status as one of the three pillars of strategic engagement in Asia-Pacific. And indeed, let's hope there'll be a fourth pillar before too long in the form of an FTA with India. Now, third and final aspect is the signal that CPTPP membership gives about this country's global trade policy aspirations and role. And as the noble Lord Lamont said, it is to be deplored, I think, that we are moving to a world of blocks of industrial policy, of protectionism. And although there is room, I think, for a little more focus on national security and trade and investment, this development generally is going to see reduced incomes, reduced growth, probably further international tensions. Now, by its very existence, the CPTPP can, and I think does, already stand for something different. It is a different kind of grouping. It's a group of mid-size but extremely important powers that support open trade, that support global free trade. They are an open and free trading counterweight to set against these broader, undesirable global trends. And it's absolutely natural, I think, for Britain to be part of that arrangement and to push for these things further within the CPTPP at a global level. And maybe in winding up or later, the Minister could perhaps set out a little more what the aspirations to use the CPTPP are, what ability it gives us to shape, broaden out our own trade policy now and into the future. So, to conclude, those who said the UK could never pursue an independent trade policy outside the EU, I think, have been proven wrong. With CPTPP accession, we've got FTAs covering over 60% of our trade, goods and services, and the only reason we've not reached the 80% target is the reluctance of the US to do new trade agreements with anybody, not just with us. So this is a big success area. Getting into the CPTPP is a big part of it, and it's why I'm delighted to support the government on this bill and getting it through rapidly soon. Thank you.
My Lords, it's always very nice to follow the noble Lord Frost. We sparred a few times on Brexit, and as he was running the Scotch Whisky Association and I was running Alcohol Concern, you won't be surprised we have a slightly different view about the duty on whisky. But in welcoming the noble Lord, the new Foreign Secretary, I'd like to assure him, as the first woman to be able to welcome him today, that he will find that we are a quarter of this House, and normally far more in evidence than perhaps we have been. So if he thinks he's going to get away with gentlemanly behaviour in future, he may find that we also have a voice. And I'm particularly pleased that he did make the Maiden speech on CPTPP, as it was the sort of flagship of the post-Brexit policy that followed after he had left number 10. Because despite, as we've heard, its very modest impact over our current trading arrangements, that is partly because we do, as we've heard from a number of speakers, already have agreements with the majority of those 11 members, and particularly Japan, of course, but also Australia and New Zealand, where we've looked at the FTAs in this House quite recently. I know in welcoming the noble Lord that the Lib Dem benches, of course, will be particularly pleased to be reminded by these benches that they were once in coalition with your government, something they often fail to declare. But, my Lords, along with my Labour colleagues, we do, of course, welcome the new Foreign Secretary. He has a vital role to play, partly in rebuilding trust and confidence in the UK, following Boris Johnson's attempts, when he was Prime Minister, to break international law by threatening to abrogate part of the treaty he'd so recently signed, and today, at a time when the government is threatening to renege on international law and our own legislation and common law in its desperate desire to fight an election with pictures of planes taking off to Rwanda. So I hope that the noble Lord, who we know is an honourable man, will help restore trust and decency in the government and thus re-establish confidence in the bona fides of the country that I think we all love and want to serve. Yeah. He will by now have been well briefed, and I understand he is very well briefed and reads everything. We hear from usual reliable sources. He'll have been well briefed on the intricacies of CPTPP. It was a pre-cooked agreement that involved us merely joining rather than being able to negotiate as with other agreements. But it is, as a number of speakers have said, it is a significant partnership. It embraces 11 countries, stretching from Vietnam to Peru, many of which, if not all, are experiencing growth and of particular relevance to this country, with increasing potential markets for the products and services for which we are so well known. However, my Lords, in order to make this work, which is now the important issue, in order to make this work for our exporters, the Department for Business and Trade will have to step up the support that it offers to companies and individuals who want to do business in CPTPP countries. Mm-hmm. The bill, of course, hardly touches that side of the main part of the actual partnership agreement, which we trust has been mentioned already, will be fully debated here. But this bill really just deals with 3 issues which require some tweaks to our legislation, whereas the majority of the agreement doesn't need any legislative changes, and hence the need for that fuller debate. Nevertheless, I do note that whilst the International Agreement Committee examined, when I was still chairing it, examined the negotiating objectives some, I think, 2 years ago, There was very broad support for accession at that moment, and actually nothing seems to have diminished that according to the evidence that has been submitted to the new inquiry. Indeed, our committee's current inquiry, as described by my noble and learned friend Lord Goldsmith, into the outcome of the negotiations, some of the stuff we've been looking at already suggests that some of the major questions are about the practicalities, such as whether the lack of a fully functioning and permanent secretariat to this rather complex agreement will suffice to iron out the technical and other issues that are bound to develop, not just with our accession, but actually with its continuing growth. And also, I'm afraid to say, about why the department's recent dialogue with stakeholders appears to have been so dismal, just when business most needs help to plan for and get help with our accession. Because the benefits of this agreement will only be realised with considerable assistance from the government, so businesses can take advantage of what is there in the new trade freedoms. As the British Chamber of Commerce, which supports speed of ratification of the agreement, says, it wants to work with government to ensure firms get the best possible access to what they define as a thriving market. But this will depend on the department reaching out to stakeholders and providing the advice, the guidance, and indeed the access that they need. 2 years ago, when we looked at it, the UK Fashion and Textile Association said they hadn't seen much export development take place, while the NFU wanted the government to put more energy and resources into export promotion and marketing. It would therefore be helpful to hear about the government's plans for working with relevant industries and professional associations to make the most of the enhanced business mobility possibilities that have already been touched on. Indeed, to give just one example, I've had a query from one particular sector, possibly a sector possibly impacted by the bill, which I'll outline here. So my concern is less that with this particular issue, but more that it has not been ironed out before by the department talking to the relevant industries. The particular question, as an example, relates to Clause 4. This amends the rolled over EU regulations to enable the Secretary of State to cancel trademarks and geographical indications retrospectively. So with the question put is, might this new power cause some conflicts with the EU should the Secretary of State remove trademarks that apply in the UK and the EU simply to satisfy a demand from a CPTPP member? And does the bill really need to make this provision in order for the CPTPP to apply in UK law, seeing as GIs are determined on a bilateral basis between CPTPP member countries? So perhaps the noble Lord could clarify this matter, but more importantly, I think, confirm that the relevant stakeholders impacted either have been or will be now consulted with stakeholders before we actually ratify and the procedures come into place. Turning to broader political issues, there is one early discussion already touched upon which will involve the government now that we are members, and that's about, of course, the future expansion of the CPTPP. We're the first country to join since it was established by its 11 inaugural members, and we're the first European member, which sort of stretches the definition of Pacific. On the agenda for the partnership is now the application for China to join. And needless to say, we will be particularly interested in the Foreign Secretary's view on this. As my noble friend Lord Collins and indeed Lord Kerr have emphasised, this strategic issue is of central concern to the UK and indeed of other countries, and we look forward to hearing in due course of the government's views on that. Most commentators see the importance of the CPTPP as being part of the Indo-Pacific tilt, a diplomatic and security matter as much as straight economic matters. So his views on where we sit in that sphere will be of continuing interest to this House. And I think it's particularly good, therefore, that we do have the Foreign Secretary from the FCDO standing alongside someone from the Department for Trade, because it stretches again that need referred to by the Noble Lord Kerr and other for this strategic framework, because trade is part of foreign policy and indeed defence policy, and therefore seeing how all of this fits together, I think is an important challenge for the government. The new Foreign Secretary has already been warned that there's a lot on his plate. We add this to it. But for the moment, this bill, which is important but a very small part of the accession, is to be welcomed. I wish it well.
My Lords, it's a pleasure and a privilege to follow Baroness Hayter of Kentish Town. I have sat on the committee with the International Treaties Committee, for a number of years, and she's chaired it magnificently before handing back to Lord Goldsmith, who has found her a tough act to follow, I think. It's also a huge pleasure to see my noble friend, the Foreign Secretary, here. It is a boost for the House of Lords, and it's a boost for the international community. And it's also a boost for those who play tennis with him, because during the fallow period, his game has improved, and we rather hope it'll go back to the status quo. I work very closely with him on trade issues. He, in a moment of brilliance, made me his trade envoy in his government, putting trade at the heart of a government, and between us we set up what is now the Trade Envoy Network, which has been a successful cross-party network promoting trade across the country, across the world. And I've seen, therefore, at first hand how internationally his status is so high, the energy with which he puts into international matters, and the respect that he's held in through the world. So I think we are incredibly lucky that he has chosen to give up an extremely comfortable and enjoyable life to return to public service. It will be more comfortable here, as has been said by other noble lords, but nonetheless less comfortable as a lifestyle, and we wish him all the best. And for heaven's sakes, this country needs a dynamic and vigorous Foreign Secretary, because in my role as Chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, I think I've done 45 flights this year. Please don't tell the eco-lobby this, but all in the interest of international trade. And everywhere I go, I have to say, the Foreign Office standing is diminishing, and is therefore critical that we have such a big hitter delivering for us in the world. And I also want to apologise in advance, because another thing he made me do when I was working with him was chair an armed forces charity, which I'm afraid I'm going to have to go to at the same time as him for a huge celebration, which has been in the diary for a long time. So I do apologise to the benches and noble lords if I have to leave at the same time as him. I shall not add to the comments that have been made by the excellent committee members that I have the honour and privilege of working with. And I want to enhance the words of our chairman, Lord Goldsmith, who said, "We are still very much scrutinising this, and we intend to give it a full wind, and it therefore would be wrong for me to add anything more to the excellent comments, other than to say it is a good start. As Lord Frost says, it is a step in the right direction. It is a modest treaty, but nonetheless a statement of intent." Curiously enough, of the now 12 countries, if we include the United Kingdom in it, 7 of them are Commonwealth countries. And it is amazing to me, and it's something that I have told the great Trade Minister, who again is a vigorous and dynamic man, Lord Johnson. It is amazing to me that neither his department nor the Foreign Office have shown leadership on establishing a Commonwealth trade treaty? Why are we sitting on our backsides, not showing leadership in the world where we have an open goal, as the noble Lord Howe has said, and many others would agree, an open goal of 56 English-speaking countries sharing so many interests together, and of which, when my noble friend, the Foreign Secretary, was Prime Minister, he attended 2 CHOGMs, so has been very much involved with it. Why are we not picking up the baton and showing real leadership in the world of international trade, in this world, as has been ably put by my noble friend Lord Lamont, where people are starting to put up trade barriers? Why are we not showing this leadership? And so, as a parting gesture and making my speech as short as I possibly can, may I put it to the Foreign Secretary and indeed the excellent Minister of Trade, my noble friend Lord Johnson, that this should become a priority.
My Lord, I'm delighted to follow the noble Lord Morland, who, like a number of previous speakers, have already been thanking the new Foreign Secretary for post to which he'd appointed them. And I too wish to say my grateful thanks to the new Foreign Secretary for posts he appointed me to, but just remind him that on one occasion he specifically required me to work alongside Michael Gove. And so, my Lords, I genuinely welcome the Foreign Secretary to his new post. I congratulate him on an excellent maiden speech. And I suspect I'm right, but perhaps he'll correct me if I'm wrong, that this is, despite all of his years in the other place, this is the first time he has ever led for the government in introducing a piece of legislation. And it's a piece of legislation that we have mixed views about, my Lords, but certainly, as others have pointed out already, because of the inadequacies of our trade scrutiny arrangements in this place, we are being asked to look at a small piece of legislation which will enable the implementation of a very large trade deal which your Lordship's House have not had a real opportunity in which to engage. We have not, in the words of the noble Lord Frost, had the opportunity to all buy into the deal. And we're having to do it in the absence of some quite important information, for instance, that would be contained in the report to which the excellent chair of the International Agreements Committee has referred to. We've not got access, because it's not yet ready, to the government requested report from the Trade and Agricultural Commission. So we are short of information, and yet it is sadly one of the few opportunities we have to debate the CPTPP and this particular, its processes, its outcome, because we've got this one bill to look at. Now, certainly on these benches, as others have pointed out, we're well aware that there are some benefits of the deal. Particularly, I would accept some significant geopolitical benefits. But, my Lords, notwithstanding the rhetoric of major economic benefits or the optimistic predictions of our new Foreign Secretary, the figures in terms of the economic benefit are very limited. It was, after all, the government's own figures, as we've heard, that show that the increase in GDP will be only 0.1. I remind people who've actually earlier said 1%, it's 0.1% of GDP. And as the noble Lord Kerr reminded us, that is up to a period up to 2040. So it's taken into account all the potential growth that will be taking place in the region. It is, after all, my Lords, a tiny fraction that we're going to get back in comparison to the 4% loss of GDP that we've got because of our exit from the European Union. And as we've heard, there are many concerns about the deal, for instance, about weak provisions on labour rights, which some argue could lead us to importing goods made by exploited labour. But echoing my noble friend Lord Razzle, I want to just concentrate in the area of intellectual property, concerns that I raised some years ago when I did serve as a member of the International Agreement Committee. And, my Lords, the whole House has accepted on many occasions that our creative industries have become the powerhouse of our economy, and intellectual property rights and their enforcement are their lifeblood. As the CPTPP, I'll get it right, CPTPP negotiations began, the creative industries, recognising that other countries in the group with less developed creative sectors would have less concern about IP issues, they made a number of recommendations about what the government should seek to achieve. Now, as we've heard, one such issue was in relation to patent grace periods, raised, for instance, by the noble Lord Collins and by my noble friend. The government was warned that the CPTPP rules require its members to have a grace period for patents, whereas the European Patents Convention does not. And if we'd agreed to the rules, it would put at risk the UK's vitally important membership of the European Patent Office. So I'm genuinely delighted that the government was successful in enabling us to set aside the CPTPP grace period provisions. But, my Lords, sadly few other of the sector's asks were achieved. And I suspect that was because we were in the position of being a rule taker rather than a rule maker. When, for instance, my Lords, we were negotiating with New Zealand for a trade deal, it was between equal partners. And as a result of the pressure we were able to put on, New Zealand agreed to increase their copyright term to 70 years after the death of an author. We had clout in those negotiations. But, my Lords, the relevant sections of CPTPP in relation to copyright terms are currently suspended. So, as a start, the sector wanted our government to press for the suspension to be lifted. But as the government had no clout in the negotiations, it wasn't. And so our creators, except where we have bilateral deals, lose out. In the digital environment, content owners rely on a range of measures to prevent piracy and the resulting loss of economic value. But, my Lords, given the CPTPP provisions that support these protections are also suspended, the sector again wanted the suspension to be lifted, but it wasn't. So there is no protection of UK content owners in the important markets such as Malaysia and Vietnam. And the CPTPP has no measures in relation to artists' resale rights, meaning that UK artists and their estates are unable to receive royalties when their work is sold on the secondary market in CPTPP member countries who haven't introduced such a right unilaterally. The sector's request for the inclusion of ARR went unanswered, and our artists lose out. And of particular concern